Somewhere along your path of awakening, maybe after a deep spiritual realization or a serious emotional collapse, you noticed something change inside you. You saw through the illusion, the repeating patterns, the constant noise of life, and then there was silence. In the beginning, that silence felt powerful, even freeing. It felt like clarity. But slowly, almost without you noticing, that sense of meaning faded away, not suddenly, not in a dramatic crash. It slipped away quietly. It was as if your soul slowly lowered the volume of life and then forgot how to turn it back up again. You stopped chasing things, you stopped pushing, you stopped caring in the way you used to. Not in a reckless or destructive way, but in that soft, tired, existential way, like a deep sigh you didn't even realize you were holding. And then a question began to echo louder inside you. Why do I feel empty now that I finally see the truth? There is a strange paradox here. We are told that spiritual awakening will light us up, give us purpose, and fill us with passion. But for many people, especially the sensitive ones, the deep thinkers, the empaths, the seekers, it often does the opposite. It drains us first. It empties us. I remember talking to a friend who was incredibly intelligent and deeply tuned in spiritually. She read all the right books, Eckhart Tolle, Alan Watts, Krishnamurti. She lived for inner work and self-inquiry. Then she went through a dark night of the soul that cracked everything open. After that, she said, she finally saw it. She saw through identity, ego, and the endless chase for validation and success. She understood it all. But about 2 months later, she was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, barely able to move. She told me, "I used to cry because I wasn't achieving enough. Now I don't care if I achieve anything at all. I thought awakening would make me feel alive, not like this." Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, hinted at this post-awakening fog long before it became something people talked about online. He didn't use modern spiritual language, but he deeply understood what happens when the unconscious starts to surface. Jung famously said that enlightenment doesn't come from imagining figures of light, but from making the darkness conscious. That quote sounds beautiful and poetic until you actually live it, because awakening is not the finish line. It's the start of a psychological death, the death of the person you thought you were. The inner structures that once gave your life meaning begin to fall apart. Your goals, your ambitions, your career plans, your relationships, even your sense of time and direction start to collapse. And here's the part most people miss. Jung would say the ego doesn't disappear. It becomes disoriented, it loses its map, and without a new map, motivation fades. So it's not that you're lazy or broken or clinically depressed. You're in a space in between. You've woken up from one reality, but you haven't yet awakened into another one. What you're experiencing right now is not failure. It's not something to fix. It's not even a disorder. It's something ancient and deeply human. Jung warned that modern society tries to avoid this phase at all costs, this pause, this void, this empty middle. He believed it was necessary for real individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are beneath all the roles and masks. But almost no one prepares you for this stage. No one tells you what happens after the awakening high fades. What's really happening inside your psyche when motivation disappears. And how this loss of drive might actually be the biggest inner upgrade of your life if you understand it properly. If you're someone who enjoys exploring the deeper layers of life and expanding your awareness, this space exists for you. It's here to help make the invisible visible and support people walking this strange and confusing path of awakening. So if you've been drifting in that post-awakening fog, wondering where your spark went, you're not losing your mind. You're going through a psychological shift that most people don't have language for. A change so deep it doesn't just alter your thoughts, it rewires the system you operate from. The goals that once motivated you, the plans, the deadlines, the hustle mindset, none of it moves you anymore. Not because you've failed, but because the entire motivation system you relied on is breaking down. And Carl Jung saw this pattern long before social media ever existed. For most of your life, your motivation came from your ego identity, the version of you that wanted approval, success, love, and recognition. That's not wrong. That's how human development works. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to function in the world. But awakening strips that mask away. Suddenly you're no longer trying to impress. You're no longer desperate to win the game, because now you see the game itself. And that's where things start to feel uncomfortable. Without the mask, your old goals no longer fit. They were designed for a version of you that no longer exists, so now you feel like an actor who walked off stage and forgot who they are without a script. That's why motivation disappears. You didn't lose your drive. You outgrew the fuel that powered it. Jung believed we are not meant to serve the ego. We are meant to integrate it and align it with something deeper. He called this individuation, the movement from a fragmented identity toward a whole and unified self. Not the small self that needs praise, but the deeper self that exists beyond personality. The self that connects you to something larger than your personal story. And this deeper self doesn't care about status, validation, or even certainty. It cares about truth. So after awakening, your inner system begins to recalibrate. It starts rejecting anything that feels fake, forced, or driven by ego. That includes jobs, relationships, ambitions, and even the dream life you carefully planned years ago. This is why awakening feels both freeing and unsettling at the same time. But Jung warned that if we stop here, we get stuck. Some people awaken and fall into spiritual bypassing. They convince themselves that nothing matters, that everything is just an illusion. So they disconnect from life. They float. They numb out. They mistake detachment for disengagement. But the deeper self doesn't want escape. It wants expression. It wants to live through you. It doesn't reject the world. It transforms how you participate in it. And to reach that stage, you have to move through a strange middle phase that Jung described clearly, but few people recognize while they're inside it. There is a phase after awakening that almost no one talks about. It isn't inspiring or glamorous. It doesn't look good online. It doesn't look like perfect meditation sessions or poetic quotes. It looks like sitting quietly, feeling blank while the world rushes past you. Jung would say you're not lost. You're in between. You've detached from the ego, but you haven't yet learned how to live from the self. This space is not a mistake. It's a rite of passage. But in a culture obsessed with productivity, stillness gets labeled as laziness. Rest gets confused with stagnation. So you judge yourself, and that self-judgment blocks the energy your soul is trying to restore. Jung described this inner pause with the concept of enantiodromia, the idea that things naturally swing into their opposite. After awakening, the pendulum swings from ego-driven striving to deep inner stillness. You move from, I must do everything, to, why should I do anything? And this swing is not wrong, it's how balance returns. In myths and ancient stories, this is the hermit stage, the death before rebirth, like a caterpillar dissolving into nothing inside the cocoon. It's not a butterfly yet, it's no longer what it was, it's just formless. And formless things don't produce or hustle, they break down so something new can emerge. This is when the ego panics. It wants certainty, direction, and action, but the deeper self whispers, let go. Something real is forming. Modern spirituality often skips this uncomfortable part. It tells you to stay positive, chase joy, and keep your vibration high. But Jung would say that if you avoid the darkness, you avoid the transformation. He believed shadow work, facing the hidden and uncomfortable parts of yourself, is not optional. It's essential. This empty feeling you're experiencing is the space where the unconscious finally has room to speak. You're not failing. You're processing. Your psyche temporarily shuts down motivation, clarity, and direction, so you're forced to feel what you avoided for years. That's the real work. And here's the unexpected part. When you stop fighting the void, something begins to shift. Motivation slowly returns, but it feels completely different. It's quieter, calmer, not driven by anxiety or pressure. It feels like remembering instead of chasing. Jung described this as the emergence of the self, not as an idea, but as an inner compass. You've moved through silence, stillness, and uncertainty, and now something subtle begins to rise. Not excitement, not fireworks, just a gentle inner pull. Not toward your old life, but toward a new way of living. This is where the self begins to communicate, not through words but through resonance, through symbols, dreams, intuition, and synchronicities. Jung believed that once the ego surrenders and the unconscious is integrated, life stops being about survival and starts being about meaning. And surprisingly, this new life often looks very ordinary. When the self leads, you don't force things. You respond. You're no longer driven by fear or comparison. You move toward what feels aligned. You don't chase clarity. You recognize it when it appears. Living from the self doesn't mean constant motivation. You may still feel tired, confused, or emotional at times. That's human. But what disappears is the feeling of betraying yourself, the feeling of dragging yourself through a life that doesn't fit. Instead, you feel drawn to create even when no one is watching. You say no to things that don't feel right, even if they look impressive. You follow curiosity instead of obligation. You choose peace over performance. This becomes the new fuel, not adrenaline but alignment. Jung called this living symbolically, trusting inner signals instead of external pressure. You begin asking different questions. Not what should I do, but what feels honest. Not what's the plan, but where is life guiding me. Not how can I prove myself, but what feels true. You stop trying to control life and start cooperating with it. This doesn't kill ambition. It transforms it. Ambition becomes devotion to growth, presence, and meaning. And ironically, this kind of energy is far more effective and sustainable than ego-driven effort ever was. So if your spark feels gone after awakening, it's because the old fire burned out to make space for something deeper, a flame that doesn't depend on validation or outcomes. Carl Jung never promised comfort, and if you're here reading this, you're already on that path. This isn't about getting your old motivation back. It's about discovering a new one rooted in wholeness, not performance. This isn't the end of your awakening. It's the beginning of becoming who you truly are.